Hi everyone, my name is Jess, and today you get to hear from Sophie on her journey through Dell. You've already heard her first two journeys I made about 2.5 years ago, and this is a follow-up conversation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. It would help me out a lot, and you'll be reminded that every single Monday I do post new content. Okay, so you are here because you want to hear how is Sophie doing now that she's been at Dell for over 2 years. And just to refresh your memory, I did create two different videos about the next gen or the sales academy at Dell at the time. So go ahead and check those videos out if you want before this one. This one is really just a follow-up from how is the time, some learnings, and I will get to some of your questions that you wrote me on Instagram. So go ahead and listen to this lovely conversation. Let's welcome Sophie Lepine to the channel. Welcome, Sophie. You have been with Dell now over 2 years, and the last time you were on my channel, or actually the last two times, you came on to talk all about the sales academy process and what that looked like, and you talked about the interview. It has been so long now that you've been at Dell, and I believe that this conversation, I have a lot of questions for you of how it's going, and welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be back. It's definitely been a few years, that's for sure. But I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions that people have and having a nice chat about what I've been doing for the last 3-ish years.
Amazing. So let's actually give the people a refresher of who you are and why your story is quite unique. If you want, you can kick that off. I can also give some like tidbits of why you're so unique.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can start by explaining how I came into the tech industry very new to it. My background is more in hospitality and event management. And with the pandemic, having to pivot quite quickly, as no one was really having any sort of events and then I found myself working in technology. So I guess that
Yeah, and
can
what I
make me a
think
bit unique.
is crazy, no, it's very unique because most people, I mean, you don't dream to go into tech sales when you're in high school or college or university, but what I think is really unique is in the midst of the pandemic, planning weddings for the last few years and then being faced with, well, do I wait it out and see how long the pandemic is going to ride on for and weddings and the wedding industry, I'm sure has changed, but has now come back to normal. I want to know, do you miss that old role, like planning weddings and the stress of that versus Dell or
Well,
versus tech sales in general?
that is a very good question. I think it's very different from what I'm doing now. I'm a fully remote employee, and that aspect I think is quite different than what I used to do. But the relationship aspect that I have with my customers, that also had with my customers at the time when planning events, is still there, and that hasn't changed. And that's I would have to say that's the one thing that I absolutely loved is connecting with people and building those relationships. So
Well,
very
that actually
similar.
leads me to the next question, which, yeah, it is very similar. What skills, besides the customer and relationship, and maybe those are the main ones, but what skills did you develop from wedding planning or event planning that you found useful in your tech sales job?
Oh, that is such a good question. I have
It's
to
like a
think about
therapy
that one.
session.
It
It's like
almost is, right? Well, and I'd have to say just the problem solving is a big thing, especially as I'm an inside sales rep or an account manager. There's different titles, I guess, that we're given, but there's a lot of troubleshooting that we have to do sometimes. And customers might, call you out of nowhere with an issue, either an order or they're planning a project and they're having issues finding solutions. So kind of being able to act quickly and come up with an action plan is probably the best thing that I took from, the previous industry that I was in. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of fires to put out on event days. So that's definitely helped me.
Well, I was gonna ask you, what is worse, brides or angry customers?
Oh, that could be debatable. That could be debatable. Uh, and the thing I had to say about that is everyone's reality is so different, right? And
Right,
like I think the reality for a couple or a bride or whatever type of event it was is so different than maybe a customer that's trying to deploy something in their environment that's needed like ASAP. And it's
right.
like so they could equally be as bad. Personally, I'd have to say I've had some pretty intense um, experiences working in events and weddings. So I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah. I'm wondering when you were first transitioning, now you have the perspective of a few years. What do you think helps you prepare for going into tech sales? Is there anything that someone that's potentially a student or also trying to make a switch of industry, is there anything that they could do to prepare for a role like this?
Um, I think I think the thing to remember, that's a really good question because I had this thought of going in feeling really intimidated because I didn't know the industry itself and I was new to it and it felt really like scary.
Right.
But I think the best mindset that or in terms of preparation, I don't know if there's anything necessarily like you could take in terms of like a course. I'm sure I mean, I know there's tons of courses and tons of things that you can do on there to prepare yourself.
Right.
But more maybe preparing your mindset of being like, um, it's not as intimidating as you think. And at the end of the day, it, I truly think it really comes down to having relationships with people and creating relationships with people and also understanding that you might be talking to a director or a CEO, but at the end of the day it's a people kind of business.
Yeah. And you're just trying to solve the problems and connect the dots for those people, and whether they have the CEO title or any C-suite title, it is really important that you kind of get that title out of your head and just get into problem solving mode. So it's good that
Yeah,
you've learned that.
yeah, I
Um, would you have, knowing what you know now and knowing how it's not as scary as you thought it was, would you have applied earlier, or do you think it was the perfect timing?
definitely, I'd have to say definitely. And I'll say a little bit of a story here, I guess. Growing up, I have an older brother, and growing up he was always kind of the tech guy in our
Right.
family, and he would like loved computers. He built his own computers. He would game all the time and everything. So I didn't know like too much about it, and I always thought oh, it's like something my brother always did, and I never thought it would be something that I would do, I guess.
Right.
So knowing how it is now, and I would have definitely applied a lot sooner than I maybe would have.
And so the journey of applying, I think we talked about it in the videos before. You applied multiple times, multiple
I did.
interviews. Now you're in this account manager, like what the industry calls account manager, inside sales, whatever you have it. What does a typical day look like today for you? It was different
Yeah,
like 2 years ago to today.
definitely. Yeah, it's for sure shifted over the last few years. But primarily it's still kind of stayed the same. And, a lot of my day looks like calling customers, being on meetings with customers, and answering emails and making quotes. So it can get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly because there's so many different aspects to the day and items that you need to action. But yeah, I'd have to say primarily you're talking to a lot of people most of the time. And then, but some days are heavy admin days as well, right? Like some days you might be answering emails or putting out fires or building quotes or working on like RFPs. So it can differ the best thing that I try to do is I organize time in my calendar for certain things because as we all know, you can get pretty carried away in your inbox.
Yep.
So it's important to make sure that you're putting time in your calendars so you kind of follow the schedule of what your day is or whatever you make it for that day.
That's great. And the learning curve of learning technology from event planning to learning the technology. What was the hardest thing for you? And still, right? Like we're constantly learning, we're constantly adjusting. There's so many new trends that hit
Yeah.
all the time. What was that like for you?
I think just adapting to all the trends, all the changes. We're only getting quicker with technology and things are changing a lot quicker. And especially, I would have to say the change every year in terms of specs on systems, how
Right.
a lot of the software is requiring a lot more, um, uh, you know, more
GPU and
memory and
hardware. Yep.
exactly. So kind of keeping up with that, I found that was difficult for sure. Um, and just I, one of the biggest things I'll always remember is learning about servers because I had no idea what servers were. And I thought it was like, in the movies when they have these like big rooms and
Yeah.
it felt so intimidating. And I remember one of my trainers had told me it's just like a big computer. That's all it
Yeah.
is. And I was like,
Yep.
oh, that's really cool. So having, good trainers to put things into perspective for me really, really helped in that aspect of kind of learning everything about the industry itself and how it works. And
And I would say as a seasoned sales professional, whatever that means. The best thing to do is to go on site and see it for yourself. And I think that's really where it comes into reality of like, oh, this is what it looks like. This is how big it is for your type of IT staff. This is, maybe some workloads are in the cloud. They're not actually on-prem. And the more salespeople can go on site to see how that works with customers and how technology integrates, the more you will learn. So if you're an
yeah,
aspiring account executive, Sophie, or anyone, this is like the best thing to do, and it's the most fun. And speaking of
yeah.
fun, what is the best thing about your job in tech sales?
Oh, the best thing. There's a lot of positives. There's a lot of positives.
Just one. Like, what is the number
Oh,
one?
that's so hard. You're putting me on the spot here. That's
Could
really
be anything.
tough.
Today, what is it? Like it could be anything, but just right now in the moment.
Well, right now, I'd have to say it's all the connections that I've made. I've been almost 3 years now in the role in this company, and I've been able to build some really great connections and friendships along the way. And I just love that. I love that so much, and I'd have to say that's my favorite thing.
All right, well, you know what's coming. What's the worst thing about this job? And I'm sure you could be like,
Well,
there's loads of things that we all hate about tech sales. I have some. Sure, you have some. Let's hear it.
There, yeah, I'd have to say, well, it's relevant to anything, right? There's equally as bad things to positive things in any situation.
So the
Um,
people, are you telling me the people?
well, no, definitely not, definitely not. I'd have to say it's personal, right? Because everyone looks at things differently and everyone
Hmm.
struggles with different things. So I'd have to say for me personally, for myself, it would
Yeah,
probably, we talked about the trends, we talked about the
okay.
changes. I think for me, that's always going to be a bit of a challenge, I
Struggle.
guess, just because I don't necessarily come from the industry.
Yeah.
So it's a
And I
lot
think
of
that comes with
learning.
experience, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Of like
exactly.
what to there are some trends that come and go, and then there's some trends that stay, right? That are not going away anytime soon. And I think only by experience, you're going to figure out how to filter what you need to learn and what you kind of need to pulse check and then let it
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
I would
exactly.
say I'll be a little bit vulnerable here, especially if the people have made it, 15 minutes into this interview, is the difficulty of working in a large company in tech sales is sometimes the slowness of how we can turn the ship. And because the ship is so large, it takes a lot longer to turn and steer than if we were in a
Yeah.
smaller org. And
Yeah.
that has driven me insane for over 10 years. And it still does.
And I remember, I don't know, I can't remember if it was you that told me this or not, but I remember when I first started, there's a lot of things that I didn't necessarily understand. And
Right.
I don't know if anyone is that's like me, but I like to know why things are a certain way. And I have to understand the full picture. And I remember someone had told me was sometimes you're not always going to understand the big picture of what is happening in such a big organization,
Yep.
and it's hard to understand that. And I think that's one thing that I kind of had to learn to say, okay, I'm not going to get every decision that they make. I'm not going to necessarily understand that aspect. So sometimes you just got to read what's in front of you and move on. But that being said, it did make me think about the remote aspect to
Yeah.
my current role. I think that is also a bit of a challenge. Don't get me wrong. I know it's a very debatable topic. There's a lot of benefits to it. There, both sides of either being hybrid or working in an office full
Yep.
time or being remote. But being remote does require you to kind of push yourself a lot to make connections and
Yes.
um, just to put
Network.
yourself out there. Yeah.
Network, meet people. You have to be a lot more creative than we were 10 years ago. And tech sales can be really demanding. I think we could work around the clock. We could work, I mean, especially when you're remote, you could just be locked down to your computer and not
Yeah.
leave your office for 12, 14 hours. Eat your lunch at your desk because there's no one else to eat lunch with. So I'm wondering, how do you maintain like the stress and the work-life balance? How do you learn to step away from your desk,
Yeah.
especially when you're so new into tech sales and there's so much to learn? How do you mentally take that pause?
Well, you have to, because if you don't, you're gonna, maybe make mistakes along the way or not be as sharp as maybe you could be. So you have to make sure you take those breaks. And that's just making sure that you're talking with your team and that you're talking with your leaders and you're saying, hey, um, I need to take a half-hour break. And some days will be busy and maybe you don't have the time, but making time in your schedule and kind of going back to what I was talking about is having your calendar laid out, right?
Yeah,
With, okay, I have a meeting, two meetings in the morning, one in the afternoon. I have my inbox at this time. I have to action. So having a good schedule in your calendar will allow you to have time to go for those breaks.
right.
So I'd have to say it is difficult, but at the end of the day, the work is always going to be there. There's always going to be emails to answer. That doesn't change. So taking either, 30 minutes or 15 just to step away from your desk is really going to help bring your stress down a little bit.
Agreed. Okay, one thing that I find newer people into the industry struggle with is being new, right? Being pegged as the new person or being pegged as the junior. I struggled with it when I was 21 and I started at Dell. The last thing I wanted to be known as junior, but I I was, right? I was 21. Uh, how do you ground yourself in that of being junior, being having to learn a lot, and I don't know if you feel that at Dell. Like, do you feel that you're junior? How do you manage that?
Well, I think I cheat a little bit with that one because I grew up with an older brother. I was always used to being, that junior kind of person, right? So
Right.
it's in my blood. But I would say for those people, so, like, for me personally, I felt like because I was that junior person, I
Yeah.
didn't really have like I wasn't really allowed to have an opinion in the room, so to speak, right? Or
Right.
I felt that way.
Right.
So I think it's understanding that, yes, okay, you're new to the industry, you're new to the territory, you're new to the position, but it still doesn't like disqualify anything that you've learned
Right.
up to now in your career, in your
Yep.
schooling, in your life, right? So just kind of remembering that, and not to be shy to speak up, you know, when you think it's appropriate,
Right.
and sometimes you might be wrong, and that's okay. Like those are just great learning steps to continue on.
Exactly. Finding your voice and the right time to speak up is so crucial in any industry. Doesn't matter if it's tech. One or two more questions here before we wrap up is someone new is coming in, they're a student, they're very nervous to apply to Dell or any large manufacturing business in tech. What would you tell them
I would
today?
say just do it. The worst that happens is they say no, and then you can apply again, just like I did. And
But what if they're just too nervous to even apply? They don't, if
well,
there's a blockage.
I think I think it comes down to, thinking, okay, well, like what's the worst case scenario for them? What
Right.
makes them so nervous? Is there
What's the
is there
worst thing that could happen? Right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's the thing to remember is there at the end of the day, like I was saying, like we're all people. We all have individual lives outside of like our work and our career. And I think there don't let the fear stop you from applying to a dream position of yours, you know?
Right. And try it, right? You can always decide, you know what? I did tech sales. I don't like it. It's not for me, or I need a break. And I think
Exactly.
sometimes people think, well, if I jump into tech or I jump into this type of role, does that mean I'm stuck here forever?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I,
go ahead.
no, well, I was just going to say, like, when I look at my career path going from, hospitality to tech, and yes, I pivoted because of a situation that was happening in the world, but I think it's still anyone at any age, personally, I've known people that are in their 40s and 50s that have pivoted in their career.
Yeah.
So if you're scared to apply to something because you think, oh, what if it's not for me? What if I'm not good at it? There's nothing that says that, hey, you can't try something else, right? It's not an end all be all kind of position. So it's always good to try, and then you'll know
Yeah.
if you like it or not.
So that makes me ask you, are you gonna stay in tech sales for
I
now?
think I think for now I am. I think for now I am. And I think once I learned how much of a people type of industry it is,
Yeah.
I just fell in love with it. And that's really what it comes down to is just having relationships with my customers and partners and building friendships with colleagues. It's just such an awesome environment to be in. And the trends are always going to be there. The tech is always going to be changing. But at the base, it's really a people industry. At least that's what I see it as.
Well, exactly. And I think, at least on my channel, I don't talk about that enough, but the customers are my favorite thing about my day to day, right? The people that I get to interact with, the people that are dreaming and building out new solutions, especially in AI, the amount of things that people are dreaming and creating, it is so cool to
Yeah,
just be a part of and help build that out, and being able to be a part of each company in a different way, and just inserting your piece of knowledge there or help is great. So
exactly. Yeah.
thanks for giving that insight. Thank you so much. I know we're almost out of time here, so I appreciate you hopping on. I feel like this conversation went very quickly. So if anyone
Yeah.
has any questions, feel free to comment below, and we'll respond to each and every single one of those, because the last video we did as well. And anything else that you want to leave us with, Sophie?
If you have any questions, I love to mentor people and help people in the industry. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to have a good conversation about that.
your inbox is going to be full because lots of people watch this channel and they want mentorship. So you might want to take that back, but
No, never.
we'll roll with it. And I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on, and hopefully I'll see you sooner than 2 years from now.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so if you have made it this far in the video and you like these types of conversations, feel free to comment down below. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next Monday. Take care.